I went on a cycling tour with a friend of mine through Europe in 1956, and on our way back up the Rhone Valley we were travelling from a little town called Aubagne, which is where the road joins from Marseille with the one coming from Toulon going up to Aix-en-Provence, and a car lost control coming the opposite direction, and it came diagonally across the road and pushed my friend through a stone wall, ricocheted off the wall, hit me, and then it landed back over the other side of the road. So the guy was speeding. The paper reports said that he'd been trying to pass cars for some time, and they tried to make out that his brakes failed on one side or something. I don't know the story. But I came to and sitting on the road with people hovering around me, and all I could see was this hole in the stone wall, which probably, I presume, must have been held together with mud, or wouldn't have. She would have been dead. But they wouldn't let me go to her, and I kicked up such a fuss that I got through to her, and they were very worried, and somebody had phoned for an ambulance, but they didn't wait, and they stood her up, and I was shaking my head off and telling them to leave her lying down. But they stood her up, and the back of her leg just dropped out. Like, it was incredible. She had a really very, very deep laceration that stretched for about 8 inches, and it was like a pedicle dropping out, and you saw everything, your muscles and nerves exposed underneath. It was absolutely appalling. Her wrist, her watch had turned around, she had a metal strap, and that had cut right through her posterior surface of her wrist and exposed. We could see all the tendons there, but there was fortunately no nerve damage, and she had head injuries as well. They carried her between them and put us in the back of a truck and started tearing off to the hospital. I think they thought she was going to bleed to death or something. But the ambulance passed us going the other way to the scene of the accident. And then it caught up with us. We were transferred to the ambulance and taken to the ward, taken to the hospital. They took us into the operating theatre, put her on the table, not in the prep room, in the theatre itself, put her onto the table, proceeded to take her trousers off. They didn't cut them off, they pulled them down over the leg. And at that stage I passed out. But the hospital was just appalling. And they had everything from paediatrics through to geriatrics there. 2 surgical wards. I don't think that, certainly hadn't heard of physiotherapy. We were there for several weeks, and the British consul came, and, somebody kept saying, "Oh, you're going to be flown back to Britain." One doctor kept telling us this all the time, so we said, "Well, no, don't come over, we'll be okay. We'll get back to Britain." Leslie was unconscious for days, but eventually a New Zealand lady who had read about it in the paper took us to her home. They took us by ambulance to her home in a vineyard in a wee place called Cassis, which is out of Marseille. And we recuperated there until we were fit enough to travel back to England. But there was absolutely no care. If you couldn't wash yourself, and your relatives didn't come in, you didn't get washed. Patients that had been there any length of time all had bed sores. They wondered what I was doing with it. I asked for my panniers from the bike, and because I had some methylated spirits for our wee stove. So I was treating Leslie right from the time I was able to get out of bed. And she'd be the only one in our ward that had been there any time that didn't have a bed sore. But they couldn't decide whether she'd fractured her left leg, the right one. The surgery and stitching up was very good. They had a drain that they just seemed to leave until one day I pulled back the bedclothes and held my nose, and I got the matron through and pointed things out to her. It was amazing. There were no curtains in the place. We had gynecological patients having vaginal lushes in front of everybody else. They brought a lady of 86 in one night with suspected fractured neck of femur. They grabbed her by her shoulders and her legs and hoisted her into bed, and she screamed her head off. It was archaic. Oh, I don't know that this probably has nothing to do with physiotherapy, but the thing was, they were so surprised when I measured Leslie up for crutches, made sure that they fit, they were adequate, and so they landed taking me up to the men's surgical ward to make sure that their other patients had crutches that were the right length. They couldn't understand why I gave her any exercises. It really was a complete eye-opener to me to see how some places in a civilized world were still operating. It was 1956, and so we had to sign documentation when we left France that no further claims would be made on them when we got back to England. Well, we didn't know how long Leslie was going to be off work, and it was months before she really got back to work. She went home with a huge carbuncle that, they excised it. She had a scar, it had a big open wound, and my hospital there admitted her into the nurse's sick bay because she was a friend of mine, which I thought was absolutely incredible. The hospital looked after us very, very well, but French hospitals at that time weren't what we know them to be.